Open your phone tonight and scroll for 90 seconds. And somewhere in that blur, you will feel it. The small, sour ache that everyone else got the life you were promised, and you got the waiting room. Their trips, their weddings, their kitchens, their love. You did the things you were supposed to do. You found the partner, took the job, painted the walls a tasteful color. And still, on the quiet evenings, a voice you would never say out loud whispers the same question. Is this all there is? Surely somewhere there is a bigger, brighter, more romantic life, the one that was really meant for you, and somehow you ended up with this one instead. That ache is not new, and it is not yours alone. A French novelist named it with terrifying precision in 1857 in the story of a provincial doctor's wife who could not bear how ordinary her life turned out to be, and who set fire to everything she had, chasing the dazzling life she had only ever read about. Her name became a diagnosis. This is Madame Bovary, the book that saw the disease of wanting more coming a century and a half before an algorithm learned to feed it to you 60 times an hour forever. The book is Madame Bovary, written by Gustave Flaubert and published in full in 1857, after first appearing in installments the year before. Flaubert was a French writer of almost inhuman patience, a man who could spend an entire day hunting for a single right word, reading his sentences aloud in his study until the rhythm was perfect. He was chasing something new, not the sweeping romance and noble heroes that filled the popular novels of his day, but ordinary life rendered so exactly that it became art. When the book appeared, the French government put him on trial for offending public morality. A respectable married woman, an affair, desire described without punishment on nearly every page. He was acquitted, and the scandal made him famous overnight. But here is what matters for you. Flaubert set his story in the grey little towns of provincial Normandy, among pharmacists and shopkeepers and dull country doctors, precisely because he wanted to hold up a mirror to the boredom of an ordinary middle-class life, and to the poison that boredom breeds in a person taught to expect a fairy tale. His heroine, Emma, was raised on romantic novels in a convent, and she walks into adult life certain that it owes her passion, luxury, and rescue. It owes her nothing of the kind, and the collision between the life she was promised and the life she actually got is the engine of the whole tragedy, which is exactly why, 170 years on, the book has never felt more current. Here is the whole novel in one sentence. A woman raised on fairy tales cannot bear how ordinary her real life is, and destroys herself, her marriage, her money, her name, her life, trying to force reality to feel like the romance in her head. That is it. Emma Bovary is not wicked. She is us, turned all the way up. She wants beauty, passion, intensity, a life that feels like the books she loved, and she is trapped in a marriage to a decent, dull man in a town where nothing ever happens. Flaubert is not scolding her, and he is not excusing her. He is doing something far more unsettling. He is showing you, in merciless close-up, exactly how a human being talks herself into ruin, one reasonable feeling step at a time. We will walk it in 5 beats. First, the fairy tale of marriage, the fantasy that a wedding will finally begin your real life. Second, dying of boredom, the slow suffocation of an ordinary existence that refuses to sparkle. Third, I have a lover, the intoxication of the escape that promises to fix everything. Fourth, the cracked kettle, the moment the grand feeling meets the tired, second-hand words we have to say it in, while the lover on the other side is already bored. And fifth, the bill comes due. Debt, abandonment, and a death that the smug, mediocre survivors of the story barely pause to notice. 5 beats, 1 ordinary woman, and a mirror you may not enjoy looking into. First beat, the fairy tale of marriage. Emma Rouault is a farmer's daughter, convent-educated, her head stuffed full of romantic novels. Moonlight, sighing lovers, castles, swans. So when a kind, awkward country doctor named Charles Bovary falls in love with her, she says yes, half in love with him and half in love with the idea of finally being a bride. She expects marriage to be the door through which her real, luminous life will at last arrive. And then it doesn't. Charles is gentle, devoted, and crushingly boring. He chews loudly. He has no ambition, no poetry, no idea that anything is even wrong. And Emma slowly realizes that the great feeling the novels promised is simply not there. Flaubert writes the moment with quiet devastation. Before marriage, she thought herself in love, but the happiness that should have followed this love not having come, she must, she thought, have been mistaken. Sit with that sentence, because it is the whole trap in miniature. She had confused the anticipation of love with love itself, the shimmer of the fantasy with the plain reality of a person. And when the shimmer faded, she did not conclude that all fantasies fade. She concluded that she had picked the wrong life. You know this move. It is the second date that isn't electric, so you decide it must be the wrong person. It is the job you wanted for years that, once you have it, is just work. So you assume the right job is still out there, glowing somewhere else. Emma's first, fatal error is the one we make constantly, mistaking the death of a fantasy for proof that the real thing was a mistake. The takeaway of this beat is quiet and hard. No wedding, no partner, no arrival ever feels like the fairy tale, because the fairy tale was never real to begin with. Second beat, dying of boredom. Early in the marriage, while the Bovarys still live in her first little town, one glittering night seems to promise everything. Emma is invited to a ball at a nobleman's chateau. Waltzes, candles, silk, aristocrats who smell of a wider world. And she tastes, for a few hours, the exact life she believes she was born for. Then the carriage takes her home to the grey provincial town, the dull husband, the endless identical days. And that single night of splendor does not satisfy her hunger. It sharpens it into agony. It is this poisoned longing that wrecks her health, until Charles, baffled and worried, moves them to a new town, hoping a change of scene will cure her. Nothing does. Now she knows precisely what she is missing. She drifts through her days at the window, watching the empty road, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Flaubert lets the despair break out of her in 4 bare words. Good heavens, why did I marry? There it is, the cry of every person who has ever looked at a life that is, by any measure, fine, safe, comfortable, kind, and felt only a suffocating, what if this is all there is? This is Emma's disease at full strength, and it is the disease the modern world has perfected. The ball is now permanent and pocket-sized. Every time you scroll, you attend 1,000 chateaux, other people's holidays, romances, kitchens, bodies, and come home to your own ordinary road, feeling the same sharpened hunger. The comparison does not make you grateful, it makes you ache. Emma had one dazzling night to poison her. You have an infinite feed. The takeaway of this beat is a warning, a glimpse of a life you think you should have had, is not inspiration. Handled wrong, it is the slow poison that makes the good enough life you actually have feel unbearable. Third beat. I have a lover. Into Emma's boredom walks Rodolphe Boulanger, wealthy, handsome, and a practiced, cold-blooded seducer who sizes her up in a single glance and decides she will be easy. At the town's agricultural fair, amid prize pigs and droning speeches, he murmurs grand romantic lines into her ear, and she, starving for exactly this, believes every word. They become lovers, and Emma is transfigured. The fantasy has finally actually arrived. A real affair, secret meetings, passion at last. Flaubert gives us her exaltation in a line that has echoed for 170 years. Looking at herself in the mirror, she can hardly believe it and repeats to herself, "I have a lover, a lover," delighting, in Flaubert's words, at the idea as if a second puberty had come to her. Feel the electricity in it, because it is real. This is the high the whole book has been climbing toward, the intoxicating certainty that you have escaped your small life and stepped into the big, bright one at last. And here is where Flaubert quietly slides in the knife. Emma believes the affair is the answer, that Rodolphe is the missing piece who will finally make her life feel like the novel. But she has not solved anything. She has simply found a new, more thrilling screen onto which to project the same old fantasy. The escape feels like transformation. It is only a change of scenery. Anyone who has ever been sure the new relationship, the new city, the new job would finally fix the ache, and felt that first glorious rush of, "I have a lover, I have a life," knows exactly how convincing this moment is, and exactly how little it lasts. The takeaway, the escape that promises to fix everything, is not a cure. It is the same hunger, wearing a more exciting outfit. Fourth beat, the cracked kettle. Here is the cruelty at the center of the book. Emma pours her whole soul into Rodolphe. She writes him feverish letters, dreams of running away together, loves him with the total, desperate intensity of someone staking her entire existence on one person. And Rodolphe? He is already bored. He has heard it all before, from other women, in almost the same words, and because her passion sounds like every other passion, he assumes it must be just as shallow. Flaubert steps in here with one of the most quietly heartbreaking observations in all of literature. He notes that Rodolphe could not see the difference of feeling beneath the sameness of the words, as if the fullness of a soul did not sometimes overflow in the emptiest phrases, since human speech is like a cracked tin kettle on which we hammer out tunes to make bears dance when we long to move the stars. Read that again, slowly, because it is the tragedy of every human heart. We feel things vast enough to move the stars, and all we have to carry them out is the same worn, second-hand words everyone else uses. So the deepest love can come out sounding like a cliché and be dismissed as one. Emma's real anguish gets filed by Rodolphe as the usual romantic noise, and when she finally begs him to run away with her, he does the coward's arithmetic and abandons her, famously slipping his farewell letter into the bottom of a basket of apricots he sends to her house. Emma collapses into a brain fever that nearly kills her. In the age of the screen, this ache is everywhere. The message that means everything to you, read as just another needy text. The real feeling flattened into the same tired phrases as everyone else's. The takeaway is tender and terrible. We are all longing to move the stars, and mostly we manage only to make the bears dance, and the person we most need to understand us hears only the kettle. Fifth beat. The bill comes due. This is where the fantasy sends its invoice. All through the novel, Emma has been buying the feeling of the life she wants. Dresses, gifts, luxuries, on credit, from a smiling, endlessly patient shopkeeper named L'Heureux, who is quietly braiding a noose out of her debts. She takes up a second affair with a young clerk named Leon in the city of Rouen, throwing money at hotel rooms and lies. And then, all at once, the bills come due. L'Heureux calls in everything. Emma faces the public seizure of her home, total ruin, the exposure of it all. Frantic, she runs to every man who ever claimed to love her. Rodolphe, Leon, others, and begs for money. Every single one refuses her. The romantic heroes of her fantasy turn out to be, to a man, ordinary cowards. Cornered, humiliated, and out of exits, Emma swallows a handful of arsenic and dies a slow, ugly, unromantic death. Nothing at all like the beautiful, tragic endings in her novels, while a blind beggar sings a crude song beneath her window. And now watch what Flaubert does, because it is merciless. Emma dies. Her broken husband Charles dies soon after. Their little daughter is sent off to work in a cotton mill. But the pharmacist Homais, the pompous, self-satisfied, utterly hollow voice of respectable progress, a man who never felt one true thing in his life, thrives. The novel's final, devastating line is about him. He has just received the Cross of the Legion of Honor. The dreamer is dead in the ground, the smug mediocrity gets the medal. The takeaway of this beat is bitter and clear. The fantasy always sends a bill. It is always larger than you think, and the world does not reward the person who felt the most. It rewards the one who never risked feeling anything at all. So what does all of it add up to? On the surface, Madame Bovary is a tragic tale of adultery. A bored wife, 2 affairs, a mountain of debt, a bottle of poison. But underneath, Flaubert is doing something that has never stopped being relevant. He is anatomizing one very specific way of being unhappy, the habit of measuring your real, ordinary life against a glittering imaginary one, and finding the real one unbearable every single time. Emma is destroyed not by love, and not really by men, but by a story in her own head. The fairy tale that a life worth living must feel constantly heightened, romantic, and special. Every beat we walked is that same fantasy, tightening. The fairy tale of marriage that reality could never match. The boredom that a single glimpse of splendor turned to agony. The lover who felt like an escape and was only a change of scenery. The cracked kettle where even real feeling comes out sounding second-hand and gets dismissed. And the bill, always larger than expected, that the fantasy quietly runs up in the dark. What makes the book great, and not merely sad, is that Flaubert refuses to let you feel superior to Emma. He builds her out of the exact appetites you carry, for beauty, for intensity, for a life that means something, and then shows you, step by careful step, how those appetites, pointed at a fantasy instead of at your actual life, become the very thing that eats you alive. Emma is not a warning about other people. She is a mirror, and Flaubert holds it very close to your face. Here is the one thing to carry out of this book and into your week. Emma Bovary was destroyed by comparison, by holding her ordinary life up against a dazzling imaginary one and choosing to believe the imaginary one was the truth she had been cheated of. And you live inside a machine built, quite literally, to do that to you all day long. So this week, try one deliberately un-Emma thing. When the ache rises, when the scroll leaves you convinced that everyone else got the brighter life, stop and notice that you are comparing your whole ordinary Tuesday against a stranger's single most beautiful edited second. That is Emma at the window, mistaking one night at the chateau for the life she should have had. Then do the harder thing. Turn back toward your actual, unglamorous life and find the one real thing in it worth tending. Not the fantasy partner, but the actual person beside you. Not the perfect life elsewhere, but the plain work in front of you, done with some care. Flaubert is not telling you to kill your desires. Desire is human and good. He is warning you where they turn to poison, the instant you aim them at a life that exists only in your head and let it convince you that the real one, the only one you have, is a mistake. Emma never learned to want the life she was actually living. That, in the end, is what killed her. The quiet, radical alternative is to look hard at the ordinary life you have and decide it is not a waiting room for a better one. It is the one. It was always the one. Gustave Flaubert spent nearly 5 years and an agony of crossed-out sentences building one quiet, dangerous mirror. A woman who could not forgive her life for being ordinary and burned it to the ground, reaching for a story that was never real. He gave us the fairy tale and the boredom, the lover and the cracked kettle, and the bill that always comes due. And he refused, to the last page, to let us pretend we are not a little bit Emma too. If this walk through Madame Bovary gave you something worth keeping, subscribe. A new classic every week, faithfully, in about 20 minutes. Next time, we leave the grey towns of Normandy for the dusty roads of Spain and Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote. The story of a man so lost in the romances he loved that he rode out to live one, mistaking windmills for giants, and became the most beloved fool in all of literature. Emma and the Don are two sides of one coin, both wrecked and both somehow saved by the stories in their heads. And tell me in the comments, what is the imaginary better life you catch yourself measuring your real one against? And what do you think would change if you finally stopped? I read every reply.